Maybe something. That's pretty low. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the CUAHSI Cyber Seminar on the National Flood Interoperability Experiment. My name is Rick Hooper. I'm the we have about 2 minutes. I'm the president of CUAHSI, and we have just a few minutes before the top of the hour, so as people are coming on, just stand by, and we will get started here in about 2 minutes. Okay, we're just at the top of the hour, so I'll begin with just a few introductions. So as I said, my name is Cooper. I'm president of CUAHSI. We are very proud and pleased to announce the National Weather Service is supporting us to hold what is the first ever Summer Institute at the National Water Center, which is shown on your screen. We have proposed, and the Weather Service is supporting, the National Flood Interoperability Experiment as the Summer Institute this year. We're going to talk about some of the details of that. Concept here, and just to go over the words in that title, are focusing on floods, and that interoperability word comes about because we want to basically expose a new generation of graduate students to the data services that are now becoming available. CUAHSI's been at the forefront of developing some of these, the HIS project that was led by David Maidment over the last 10 years. And this has matured to a point now where we have an unprecedented access to data from multiple federal agencies as well as universities. So this is a fantastic opportunity to learn about these new data services and how they're going to assist the science, how to advance our science, and how to the public's ability to respond to these catastrophes like flash floods. And so we have been working over the last few months in a very accelerated form to develop this Summer Institute. I'm going to introduce now Andy Ernest from the University of Alabama. He's the director of their Environmental Institute at the University of Alabama, and basically will serve as the host for this upcoming Summer Institute. So with that, Andy, would you want to take it over?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Rick. Just to kind of put things in perspective here, I can literally see the copper dome of the National Water Center from my office. It's physically located probably about 500 yards from my office. So it's a really exciting time for us here at the University of Alabama. Let me start off by kind of recapping some of the grand challenges that we discussed, or David Maidment discussed in our last introductory webinar on the National Flood Interoperability Experiment last year. We've essentially phrased three overarching grand challenges that we're hoping to answer, or we're hoping to have student teams answer over the course of the next 9 months. The first one dealing with real-time forecasting. How can near real-time hydrologic simulations at high spatial resolution covering the nation be carried out? And this is one of as Rick mentioned, one of the outcomes of the National Water Center is the availability of a coherent set of water data services emanating from the National Weather Service, the Corps of Engineers, the USGS, and other water-related federal agencies. So how do we use that data in such a way that we can carry out near real-time simulations? The next item, challenge is consistent with the NOAA philosophy, which is R2O, or research to operations, and that goes as how can this lead to improved emergency response and community resilience. And then finally, how do we sustain this? How can an improved interoperability framework support the first two goals and lead to sustained innovation in the research to operations process? So to advance those challenges, or to help support those challenges, we've defined 4 themes that we believe the projects will fall into, that come out of this interoperability experiment and that I executed during the Summer Institute. We believe they'll fall into one or more of these 4 themes, loosely broken out by science, technology, decision support, and applications. And that's how can, the science question is how can we better connect storm hydrometeorology with flood hydrology? And there are other aspects to the fundamental science question. The technology question is how can we create high spatial resolution near real-time flood forecasting model for the continental United States. And then the decision support theme is how is the gap closed between national flood forecasting and local emergency response. And then finally, how do we apply all of these tools, the science and the technology and the decision support frameworks? Excuse me a second. How can we apply those tools at the regional or national scale? How can the knowledge and tools created in the first 3 phases be applied in specific local circumstances to particular flood events? So the schedule for the Summer Institute starts today. January 7th is the launch. There is a steering committee, and I'll identify the members of the steering committee later on in this presentation. 2 weeks from today, we will have a technical review in which a more detailed review will be provided on the services that are emanating from the National Flood Interoperability Experiment, or NFIE, as we affectionately call it, during a second seminar. And 2 weeks after that, we will come out with a third CUAHSI webinar in which we'll provide examples of projects for interested applicants. And then 10 days after that, or 11 days after that, we will have the applications due. So students or student teams that are interested in applying to participate in the Summer Institute will need to get their applications in by the 15th of February, so they probably want to get started on the process now. They'll need to get them to CUAHSI, and we'll provide details on how to submit and the format and so on later on. 30 days after the applications are due, the NFIE steering committee will announce the successful applications. The applicants could be individuals, they could be teams, and indeed if individual applications come in and the steering committee see synergies between individual applications or the potential to create a interdisciplinary team science-based effort, the committee might recommend to the applicants to form a team to pursue a coherent project. But regardless, on March 15th, the successful applicants and teams will be notified. 1 month later, we would expect from the successful applicants a work plan that defines a workable schedule and any resources such as data services and so on that they might need to execute their project. The Summer Institute itself is going to start on June 1st, 2015, and complete with a capstone event from July 15th through July 17th. So roughly a month and a half is the duration of the Summer Institute itself. So students or student teams that are going to be participating in this will need to have a work plan that is executable and completable within that month and a half time period, and that's the purpose of having the work plan due a month after the successful applicants are notified. The Summer Institute itself will kick off with a boot camp the first week. That'll include some training opportunities in software carpentry, data carpentry, and maybe some of the tools that that will be used during that would be of use to the participants. During the 7-week institute itself, we expect to have weekly half-day broadcast webinars where the teams will provide status updates and so on during the course of the institute. And then at the end of the institute itself, there'll be a capstone NFIE conference in which the participants will have the opportunity to present their outcomes or findings. Just to kind of get some terminology correct, that the students, researchers in the Summer Institute will be students or student teams that have applied and been accepted to participate in the Summer Institute. The students can we'll have slots for about 30 applicants to be in residence here in Tuscaloosa, actively working on their projects, either in teams or individually at the National Water Center. Those students or student teams will receive funding to travel to and from Tuscaloosa and have their room and board covered during the execution of the Summer Institute. The students, other students who wish to participate but would prefer to participate from their home institution can do so, and they'll be classified as non-resident participants. And there may be those that are a third category of students that are not funded but have elected to travel to Tuscaloosa and participate in the institute on their own dime. Projects will be the individual or team projects submitted and approved by the NFIE steering committee. As I mentioned earlier, the steering committee might recommend changes or consolidation of individual projects into a coherent team-based projects where relevant. Each project will identify faculty mentors from their home institution and potential stakeholders that may be contacted to serve as team advisors, kind of like an external advisory, a mini external advisory group for that particular team. Teams will be approximately 3 students, not much more than that, and each team will include faculty members from each institution served by the participating students. The team advisors are folks representing government, private sector, or academic sector organizations that have a vested interest in the project that the teams are engaged in. By April 15th, as I mentioned, the approved projects will need to submit a work plan that with guidance from their mentors and their advisors that identify the specific resources that are needed, along with a milestone schedule covering the 7-week period between June 1st and July 17th or July 15th to indicate how they're actually going to accomplish their outcomes. We will have a faculty in residence group. These are select experts from participating institutions, including government and private sector organizations, who will be available during the Summer Institute, either physically in person or through regular webinar connections to provide support to the teams. Also on site during the course of the 7-week institute, we will have at least 2 senior PhD student or recent graduates. Actually, we'll have a senior PhD student and a recent graduate who will be physically here in Tuscaloosa, who have done project work on specific aspects of NFIE components, who can provide on-the-ground support to the student teams, the mentors and the advisors. We will also have a group of student ambassadors. These are essentially graduate students local to the Tuscaloosa area, also working on NFIE projects, but will be available for the expatriate students and advisors that are here in Tuscaloosa to provide logistical support. The application format, we expect the initial application, which is due on February 15th, will have a maximum of 5 pages, following roughly the standard National Science Foundation format, just for consistency, but obviously shorter, 5 pages. The teams or the individuals will need to clearly identify the challenge or challenges being addressed. The individuals will need to identify their faculty member. If it is a team that is submitting a single proposal, they will, and if it's from a single institution, they'll obviously can have at least one faculty member. But if it's a multi-institutional team, we would want a faculty member mentor from each participating institution. If it's a team project, obviously identify the team members, identify any governmental, private sector, or academic advisors that will help guide the project. So these are just names or organizations that you think would have a vested interest in the projects that the students would be pursuing. Then they will need to identify the theme or themes that the project outcomes will address, and then obviously describe in detail the project approach. Identify any resources, including training or data access, facilities, et cetera, that might be needed. They will also need to specify if the application is for a funded residential, self-funded residential, or non-residential component of the program. To recap, the funded residential piece is where each applicant will have their travel to and from Tuscaloosa covered, along with their room and board while here, through funding from the National Weather Service. Self-funded residential students, there may be a limited number of spots available for these. These are students that or participants coming from NGOs, agencies, and so on that have a particular project that they want to pursue, and have their own resources that they would like to send the individual or the team to Tuscaloosa to pursue. We have probably room for 30 to 40 students to participate in the residential part of the program. So that'll be a mix of both funded and self-funded residential students. So we'll need to know that fairly early on in the process. And then the final category is non-residential, and those are folks that will be working on projects from their home institution and may decide to participate in the boot camp or the capstone event. And the final piece of the application is defining the project outcomes. We'll have a little bit more detail in terms of the evaluation process in subsequent weeks, but in a nutshell, there are three elements of the evaluation criteria, conforming again to kind of loosely the NSF structure. Is the proposal innovative and compelling? What is the likelihood of success? And how relevant is the project to the objectives of the NFIE? We've got a fairly diverse group of members on the steering committee, representing Ethan Davis from Unidata, myself from the University of Alabama, Dave Gotches from UCAR, John Goodall from the University of Virginia, Vitek Krajewski from the Iowa Flood Center, David Maidment from the University of Texas, Barbara Minsker from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and David Tarberton from the Utah Water Research Lab. And that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover in terms of the logistics of the applying for and executing the Summer Institute at this point. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to David to talk about the services that will be provided through the NFIE program.
Thank you, Andy. So I'm going to give a webinar in a couple of weeks' time where I'll go over this in a greater degree of detail, but we've been working on this actually since the opening of the National Water Centre last May, and so one of the parallel things that's going on, and besides the NFIE, is something called the Federal Open Water Data Initiative. That's a part set up by the Federal Geographic Data Committee and the Advisory Committee for Water Information. I have requested the Subcommittee on Spatial Water Data that those groups have to put into the Federal Geo Platform by March the 31st a set of 9 feature classes to support the NFIE. And these are essentially the beginning of a national water data infrastructure contributed by different federal agencies. The basis of this is the NHD Plus data set, which is, has watersheds, catchments, flow lines, water bodies, and dams. There's the USGS Water Watch stream gauge locations and services that come from them. So there'll be both points there, and there'll also be time series services of information that are flow information available at those points. The National Weather Service is going to publish its forecast basins and forecast points, and a service that shows its forecast information deriving from those points. And we're going to also publish the FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer because that deals with inundation mapping. So this will be standardized information, spatial information covering the whole nation. That will be the point of departure for what we do in the NFIE in the modeling phase. We're also going to have a running model, a national hydrology model called NFIE Hydro, that's computing the flows in all of the NHD Plus reaches for the country. That's 2.67 million reaches. And we've got that running offline now just for historical data, and during the spring we're going to make that run in forecast mode. And in doing that, we're working with both the National Weather Service and with NCAR to implement WRF Hydro, which is a framework that NCAR has developed for land atmosphere modelling and catchment modelling, and to translate the flows from that onto a catchment and river reach framework such that we can have a continuously flowing river flow network for the nation. And that we can then check what we're calculating with what the National Weather Service is producing in parallel, because they've got their operational forecast system that will have its own services available. So some of this is already done and some of it is still being worked on, but you can assume that there will be a national flow model already available as part of the NFIE flow services. Now, of course, we're just doing this in one particular way, and we don't want that to be considered definitive. We just want to suggest and to demonstrate that it's possible to do that. And one of the things that we'd like to encourage in the NFIE is alternative approaches than the ones we've adopted to doing the same kinds of things, of having a national scale system that can provide locally specific information. So we'll talk more about that in a couple of weeks' time, but at this point we want to allow time for questions and discussion. So I want to turn for the question and answer period here over to Emily Clark.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm the training coordinator at CUAHSI. So at this time, if you do have questions, you can go ahead and type your questions into the chat box, and then David or Andy or Rick can answer them.
And while people are sort of thinking about their questions, just want to maybe just summarize a little bit that with the NFIE, as David is showing, we're trying to expose then you to these new data services. So thinking about the hydrology of now, I think, is the phrase that David's using, of sort of going from the tradition of sort of historical analysis of stream flows to more of a nowcast, forecast kind of mode, which is something new and different from for hydrology, or for at least standard hydrology, and encouraging a kind of look at a data assimilation framework opens up possibilities with that, and in a different way of using simulation models. So both the sort of technical aspects or engineering aspects of doing the flood warnings and thinking how we're going to get those flood warnings out in a useful way to emergency response people is one aspect, but there's also a science aspect here of how do we look at our models. How do we assess the processes contained in those models and how they're represented? So I think it's a really exciting opportunity to be using a new set of data services. This is, in the NSF terminology, this is one aspect of big data. We're trying to use these new data resources in novel ways. So I think it's a very intriguing way, and as David said, we want to try to maximize creativity here. We see this is going to be a very intensive 7 weeks of hard work, but it should be a lot of fun, and it hopefully is something where we hope that this will be contributing a major part of your graduate education. That's one reason why we're insisting on having faculty mentors from each home institution, because we really would hope that this experience plays into your master's theses or your PhD dissertations, that this becomes a big part of it. And so that's why we want a close coordination with faculty mentors. We're not seeming to be getting too many questions here. DRI came up with a question. So how are we going to evaluate models at continental scale? David?
So that's a good question. So the first is that as a part of the services that we're providing, the CUAHSI Water Data Centre and Tufts University are going to provide every day a national summary of flow from the USGS across the whole country. So there'll be a new file every day of what the flows actually are at all these gauge locations. And a second contribution that we're hopeful of obtaining is that the Iowa Flood Centre has a very good observations data set for the state of Iowa that partly they've compiled and partly it's compiled from federal gauges and so on in Iowa. And I hope that within Iowa we'll have a better resolution for being able to produce a test for fidelity than what we have nationally.
And I think one other thing, too, is that during the course of this 7-week period, we don't expect people to be building necessarily another national model. The idea is going to be looking at how we use these data sources, even at a limited scale, but in a way that could be scaled up. I think the only thing that we want to move away from is an application of a model at a basin, the kind of the most standard thing that we normally do in hydrology, to where you want to actually explore the interoperability aspects of how you would take any particular model and then be able to deploy that at national scale, even if that does not get done within the 7-week period of the institute. Jim Nelson's asking this question about will we support student travel to boot camp and capstone as work is done from home institution. Jim, we hope to. We're still working out details of the budget, but the plan is that yes, we will. And in essence, what we would see is, depending upon the number of applications received, that could be offered some, but we would like to have people submit an application to participate and even to get the travel grants for the non-resident side.
There's a question here. Mark is asking, how are dam operations going to be integrated into the system? The dam operations can significantly alter the flood characteristics, especially in the west with large dams. There's two aspects of this, Mark. One of them is where are dams, just physically, and the dam locations are going to be part of the NFIE geodata set that is put into the geo platform. And those are reconciled geospatially with the flow network and with the water bodies. For the operations data themselves, it's a little bit more complicated because there's some national security issues involved with what goes on at dams. And we are currently collaborating with the Lower Colorado River region of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And they've already started compiling their dam operations data in a standardized form. So it may be that we won't be able to have dam operations data, well, we won't be able to have dam operations data explicitly for the whole population of dams, which is about 1,000 dams of the Corps of Engineers and Bureau of Reclamation, but we may have some. Now, the National Weather Service has to take into account dam operations as part of what it does. And so because we're ingesting the forecast services from the National Weather Service, and those forecast services on the big rivers have to have the dam operations already built into them, we are depending upon the National Weather Service to be the ones who act as the filter nationally on those who operate large dams and translate that knowledge into what happens to flows in the rivers downstream afterwards.
Imad has a question.
Will the focus be exclusively on real-time forecasting, and will it be open for other applications as well, water resource management and meeting agricultural demands? Our focus here is going to be on floods. That's the purpose for this particular experiment. It's possible that if this experiment is successful, that there'll be another one the next year on drought, and that perhaps would be more appropriate for looking at agricultural demands. If we wanted to do something that was associated with real-time water resource management, it doesn't have to be floods. I mean, there's all kinds of real-time water resource things that are going on for water supply, for example. So that could be a variant as well.
Let's see, we have DRI is typing.
Well, I can talk a little bit more about this. So the way that we got into this working with the National Weather Service in the first place was for water operations for water supply. And so the same structure that we're proposing, information services structure that we're talking about applications in floods, also works for low flows and for regular flows. And so in some places like California, there aren't going to be too many floods next summer. We know that already because there won't be any rain. So there's probably some other things could be going on as well.
And I will note, just for everybody who may have come on late, these webinars are recorded and available off of the website. And maybe, Emily, you could type in the chat box the URL information about the NFIE. And as Andy alluded to, we will be getting up sort of a more formal RFP, request for the proposals. Give me probably 2 weeks. It's going to be at least a week. We have a lot coming up in the next week. But we will be trying to formalize that and get this together. And we appreciate your humor and patience in this, because we're really trying to do this over a very, very compressed time period. This was only a glimmer of an idea a few months ago, and we're trying to make this work. So, DRI has a question now.
Okay, so will there be historical runs to do some hindcasting of flood events that have occurred in the past? That's a good question, and I don't have a clean answer to that. What would be helpful if we wanted to do particular floods in the past is to know that in the applications that you make for the Summer Institute, and then we can work with the National Weather Service to compile the data that would be necessary to represent that particular period, historical period, because we don't want to have to compile all the data for everywhere.
Yeah, and from what we've been told in working with NCAR about this stuff and the Weather Service, there is no consistent archive of this information. It's going to have to be done on a case-by-case basis. But I think that is an open thing, and particularly like in parts of the country where it's probably not going to be raining next summer, which is fairly predictable, we would want, I think it's a reasonable idea to work with some historic data as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is the idea that that we should work on flood events that have been that have impacted communities where our quasi-institutions are located. And, we've got a Halloween flood in Austin, a tropical storm Hermine. We know exactly when they happen and where they happen. And so if in your application you were to say, I would like to apply my particular project and look at the impact of this particular flood on my community, that would be a great approach, and we would try to support that. So last webinar, David made mention you've already been talking with local emergency services with respect to these. Do you already have an idea what model output will be or need to be, and how will it be disseminated? Yes, we do have some. I've done quite a bit of work locally to figure out how that will operate, and I have a colleague, his name is Harry Evans, who's Chief of Staff of the Austin Fire Department, who's working with me on that, and Harry will be the person who will be the interpreter for the National Flood Interoperability Experiment of what emergency responders need, and he's been the person that deployed fire trucks and so on for flooding in Austin for the last several decades. Now, having said that, we're still formulating how that would look, and so we're looking for input and more guidance than what just we can do in Austin.
Yeah. And one thing which hasn't, because we've been talking mostly about the modeling side, don't forget those other themes that were brought up. So there is certainly room for thinking about how to visualize the model outputs, how to translate model runs of stage height into, inundation areas.
Right.
And so I think there are a lot of opportunities here for thinking about, mashups of different kinds of data, how we display it, how we get it onto somebody's cell phone, how we do emergency response. I think we're open to all those kinds of ideas. So it doesn't have to just be the model itself. It could also be how one takes model outputs and what one does with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're looking for quite a broad range of potential applications. And here, when you're thinking about this is a good opportunity for you to be contacting your local emergency response providers to ask them, because I think you could probably get some very compelling ideas from your local response providers. And certainly this is an opportunity we encourage these sorts of non-traditional academic approaches to be really reaching out to those emergency providers.
Yeah, I'd like to think that after this experiment is over, that people could go back to their home institution and have something to say to their local emergency response community about how work could be done better in the future. There's a question here.
Are postdocs eligible?
Yeah, are postdocs eligible? That sounds like a Rick Hooper.
I think at this point we've talked about this for graduate students, everybody from first year incoming through more senior grad students. Currently, the thought is postdocs are not eligible. All these things may be subject to some change. Let me also talk about eligibility. We are hoping to expand eligibility, that there are no restrictions of nationality on eligibility, but we don't know that for sure yet. We do have to worry about, this is a federal facility, so there's some issues of non-citizens access to it, which we think can get worked out. That's the latest response from the Weather Service. And we've got to get clarification from Weather Service about eligibility for students at foreign institutions. So for right now, the answer is postdocs are not eligible, but I will we'll make the final determination of that when we get the RFP out in about a week or two.
It says faculty here too. You want to say something about faculty?
Faculty, you're welcome to pay your own way and contribute.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at faculty and residents, basically.
Yes, and so one of the ideas that we would like to encourage faculty is to say that if somebody would like to be a faculty in residence as part of the NFIE and spend some time at the National Water Centre, not necessarily the whole period, we're definitely open to that idea. And part of this would be, then there would be a sequence of faculty that could provide enrichment of the instructions to the NFIE participants. You know, it's not just sitting at your desk doing something. You can listen to somebody talking about what they're good at.
And so the concept here really is to try to be quite open on this thing. It's obviously too long of a duration to be a hackathon. It's 7 weeks. You really can't keep that pace up. But the notion is why we want to have these weekly webinars or these status reports to have a kind of more open and collaborative environment. I guess maybe also add, when we're doing these teams that we may be forming, of taking individuals and making them teams, again, we see the outcomes of this, that every student may walk away with a slightly different product out of this. It isn't just to have one, product out of your project. And so that's why we really want the close involvement of faculty mentors. We think it's probably more effective and more fun to work in a small team rather than working on your own.
One of the things I want also to mention is that one of the functions of the National Water Centre is to have a synoptic scale view of the water conditions of the country for a particular day. And we're going to ask our colleagues at Unidata and from the atmospheric science community each morning to say what is going on the weather system of the nation today, as a sort of an introduction to what's the weather pattern over the country. And we would like to be able to develop a similar summary of the hydrologic conditions of the day that would go along with that as part of what we're doing. Each morning the President is briefed on what are the things that are going on in the country that he needs to be aware of, and weather is a part of that, and water is a part of weather. So one of the things I want to encourage the students to think about is, what does the President need to know about the water conditions of the country today that might be of concern, if there's significant flood potential in particular locations or whatever.
So we don't seem to be having much more happening. We would encourage you to send Emily, if you want to put your email address in there, Emily, is just send any questions to Emily. Clearly this is kind of still coming together, although it's starting, all the pieces are sort of aligning now, but we're still putting this together. We will be putting out a more formal RFP, and I'll say within the next 2 weeks. And I think that as you begin to discuss this and are interested, I'm sure you will have more questions. The basic sequence we have of webinars coming up is in 2 weeks' time, David will be talking in more detail about the kind of technical resources that will be available and kind of what has been done to date in the flood modeling, what they've tried to do, and sort of the vision that hopefully will start germinating some ideas in your mind about how you might want to do. 2 weeks after that, so 4 weeks from today, we're going to do some presentations, probably with some student presentations about potential projects, and then also have a fairly extended period of time for you to ask questions about whether your project seems to be appropriate. And as you have those questions, I would encourage you to just submit them of saying, this is what we're thinking about, does this seem to be appropriate, and we'll try to get those things answered and back to you. This is an unusual thing. We want to kind of be as open and encourage as much creativity as possible. But we do want to see that a key aspect is that all the projects take advantage of these services that are now available.
One of the other things that we want to mention, and that Andy flagged in the presentation that he was making, was we want to emphasize team science. And this is at the initiative of Emily Reed, who is with the U.S. Geological Survey Center for Integrated Data Analytics in Madison, Wisconsin. And she is keen on the notion of being able to have a formal framework for team science, and also engaging experts from the USGS and other federal agencies to help particular teams. So one of the resources that we hope to bring to the process as the proposals start coming together is the capacity for you to be interacting with some people from the federal government or elsewhere that could help you with what you're doing outside of simply what's available at your university.
Yeah, I think we can probably basically wrap it up. Andy, any final comments or observations from you?
Only to reiterate the idea behind the teams. I think the the really interesting projects are likely to involve individuals from multiple different disciplines, ranging from the social sciences to the decision sciences and the hydrologic sciences. And so there's an opportunity to create some really interesting projects, and that's where the input from the faculty mentors and engaging students in teams, I think, is going to result in some really unique and interesting outcomes.
And let me also add is that, I mean, part of the reason or the rationale for the Weather Service doing this is that they see the need for developing a new generation of scientists. There's going to be actually quite a few openings at the Water Center. And so, I mean, there's a career option here that's emerging from the Weather Service, as Don Klein is the interim or acting head of the Office of Hydrologic Development, and I think he's bringing a kind of a very new view into the Weather Service and this whole integrated water resources systems and science and support, whatever it is actually looking at questions which are not traditional for the Weather Service, such as drought, and this whole vision of doing comprehensive water resources forecasting for the nation is emerging as going to be an important driver. And so there are jobs down the line here to be thinking about.
So we'll sign off here in a moment, and there'll be another webinar in a couple of weeks. We'll talk more about the technical resources that we intend to have available. I'll also outline more about the integration with the emergency response system, the fire and police and so on, that we anticipate happening as a consequence of the detailed forecasting that we think we can do with the NFIE.
Okay, with that, fine. Then we'll call it over at that point. As again, this is recorded. Tell your friends. Take a look at this, and again, feel free to send questions into Emily, and we'll try to get back to you as quickly as we can. So with that, thanks everybody for attending, and look forward to your continued involvement in the NFIE. Thanks. Bye bye.